Hello and welcome to OC Avery, and welcome to the first episode of the Natives and Norwich Zoom Room. On the 26th of February 2014, the group was launched on Facebook by Dave Coughlin and Mac Finch, and now nearly 7 years on, the group has got 11 members of staff, a great sponsor as Avian World Dublin, and over 2,400 members. So now today is the first episode of the Natives and Norwich Zoom Room, and our special guest is Owen Welsh, one of the Irish judges and native bird keepers. So we'll get into the interview. It's about 40 to 50 minutes long, and it's really enjoyable. You'll learn a lot, and then I'll talk to you after the actual call. So without further ado, welcome to the first episode, and this is it. Hello and welcome to the first episode of the Natives and Norwich Zoom Room. This is the first episode with Owen Welsh, so thank you for joining us, Owen. So we'll start off with, would you introduce yourself, please, and give us a quick overview of the birds you keep?
I'm Owen Welsh, British stroke native bird fancier and exhibitor. I keep mainly native finches, goldfinches, linnets, siskins, redpolls, bullfinches, greenfinches, and the occasional chaffinch stroke bramble or yellowhammer, and with a few canaries, but the canaries are generally just for fostering and nothing else.
Fantastic. It sounds like very similar mix to what I've got at the moment. Obviously with the canaries mainly being for muling or as feeders rather than actually for the show bench. So we'll start off with then, how did you get started? Like, what age were you? Did any of the family keep birds prior to you?
I was a lot younger than you, Oliver. We got our first redpoll in the family when I was about 6, maybe 7.
Oh, right.
The redpoll was brought home from probably the bird market or a pet shop by my dad, and it was a family pet. And that bird fascinated me. It used to fly around the dining room and pick at the table. And on one occasion, I remember I got a shock when it flew out the window, the little window that was open, and it actually came back again. So we had it until it passed away. So we had that for a number of years. Now, an uncle of mine, Mick Murphy, who would have been, he would probably be about 120 years old now, if he was still alive. He was a border canary fancier. And when I would go visit him, when he lived down in East Wall in Dublin, I was always fascinated to see a small shed, but he had a fantastic setup. The way his cage is all lined out and set up, and watching those canaries used to fascinate me, you know. And the fact that he'd give me sixpence, maybe, you know, being my uncle, he would give me that, even fascinated with me more.
Oh, fantastic.
I
mean, a redpoll as a family pet is a little different to the budgie as a lot of people would usually start with something like that.
Yeah, well, the redpoll probably would have only cost about maybe 6 pence.
Wow.
Where a budgie might have cost a shilling, or, you know, so
yeah,
it would go down to economics, I'd say, you know.
Yeah. Oh, wow. That's great. And obviously starting out with the British birds, for myself, it was starting out with exotics and parakeets and things like that about 6 years ago, and then developing it into the actual native birds and keeping birds like I keep them today rather than a large mixed aviary. So that's really a different start than a lot of people usually have. When did you start showing your birds then? What was your first show experience like?
I first shown in 1968. I was 24 or 25, I think I was. My first show was the second show of the Irish Native Bird Breeding Society, and it was in Creighton Street in Dublin City. Now, I probably had 10 birds entered, and I might have got 3 or 4 firsts, a couple of seconds, and a couple of thirds. But unfortunately, I didn't get a rosette.
Right.
Because competition, you know, I would have been a novice. I was too young to be a junior, or too old to be a junior. But I would have been a novice then, and I was disappointed because, as a few other guys who had only started, because you get a few first and you think you're going to get something for it, but then again you realise that a first doesn't necessarily mean a prize. So yeah, that was
Yes.
quite the treat in 1969.
Wow. So you've had quite a long time of actually showing the birds then. So from the late 60s to now, I presume you still show the
Yeah,
birds now?
just showing. Yeah, yeah. Like my last show was the Irish Native in the year gone, 2020, and I had
Yes.
best British board, best native board in
Oh,
show
brilliant.
opportunity. Yeah, so yeah, it's
Yeah.
been very, very successful and competitive
Yeah.
all those years.
That's
Yeah.
fantastic.
Yeah.
So yeah, so you say about your first wins then, and the first birds. Can you remember what those birds were which got first?
Well, I remember being presented with a goldfinch by Barney O'Connor. Now, Barney since passed on, and he was a great boardman. And he gave me this goldfinch as a novice. And I trained it and I done what I was told to do. And I got it. It was very steady and it was a beautiful board. It wasn't big. But anyway, uh, it won a few shows and I can't remember which ones they were, but I know on one occasion, as a novice, I was in those days you'd showed for 3 years as a novice.
Right.
And although I'd won previous shows, best novice and whatever, I decided for the last year in my third year as a novice that I would fool the judges, I'd fool everybody and enter as a champion. Now the judge was a man called George Murphy, and I went down to the show on the Sunday. It was Wexford, and I went down to the show and walked into the hall. And George Murphy said to me, "Where's your goldfinch, Owen?" And I said, "I don't know, it must be up there somewhere." He says, "I didn't see it." He says, "I was looking out for a novice goldfinch." And I says, "George, I didn't show as a novice, I showed as a champion." But he looked at me. Now, the man would never swear in a million years. And he would have sworn that day if he did. I fooled him. Now, the board got best native in show, best goldfinch, best champion, best everything, yeah. And one thing he liked about the board was the quality of colour. It was as yellow a board as you could get. Now, as he said to me, size means nothing in an exhibition board. It's all about quality and condition. So, yeah, that was that's the first memory I have, or the last memory I have of all those years ago when I won a major prize.
Yeah. That's fantastic. So you went up to champion a year early, instead of having a last year's
show early. Yeah, at the end it was the last show of the year.
Oh right, okay. So you'd shown as a novice throughout, and then the last show was you threw as a champion.
The last show, yeah, I just went up, yeah.
That's brilliant. Obviously, through the judges there as well. So, what was your most memorable win then? You get greatest achievement on the show bench.
My greatest achievement on the show bench was back in 2015.
Oh right.
And it was the Irish Native Board Breeders show again, right? And Bob Partridge was the judge. And Bob came over from the UK. Do you know Bob? Have you heard of Bob?
I don't believe so. No, I've not.
Bob is big time in the BBC. Yeah.
Sorry, what was his name again? Bob
Partridge.
Oh yes, I have. Sorry, I misheard you. Yes, I've read some of his books as well. Yes.
Yeah. And Bob actually was the judge anyway. And I was secretary at the time, as I had been since. And I was down doing all my paperwork. And the next thing somebody comes down and says, "I'm doing very well." Anyway, when I went up to see the results, I had best board and show. I had best British board stroke native board and show. Second best native stroke British board and show. Third best British stroke native board and show. Best ABCR board and show. And then a few more below that, like best champion. It was the most successful show ever for me.
Wow. So you took up most of the winners table, I guess, then with that.
I had all the main awards, yeah, and I had in total 12 prizes that day, yeah.
So, wow.
Yeah.
That's really something different, taking so many prizes like that.
So many prizes. But that was one that never. I still actually have the results sheet for that,
Yeah.
In my sort of
Wow. Yeah, that's fantastic.
Yeah.
What was your first judging experience like then as a judge?
My first judging experience, I was only 1 year, I think, in as a champion. And I was asked to judge the South County show, right?
Right.
And of course, as you do, I volunteered, yes, no problem. And I was very, very worried because you don't know, there was an awful lot of critics then, as there is now. So, you
Yeah.
put your foot wrong, you're in trouble. Anyway, I just went out to judge the show with the butterflies in my stomach. But one individual had said to me, make sure of one thing in your judging. Pick out birds that you like yourself, not birds that somebody else might like or that you think somebody else might like. Pick out the birds that you like yourself. Anyway, as I was judging, the next thing up comes a snow bunting in a cage.
Oh,
And I had
fantastic.
never seen a snow bunting in my life, right? So
Yeah.
I went, my God, what's this? And I had to ask, what's this? It's a snow bunting, right? It was classed as any other bunting, right?
Yeah.
So anyway, it was absolutely beautiful and it was staged to perfection and it was very, very steady. It was a perfect show boy. So I made it best novice, right?
Right.
And whatever else, I think maybe a goldfinch won best champion and probably went on to be best neighbor. I'm not really sure of that. But the, the slagging I got over putting a snow bunting up as best novice based on the fact that I didn't know what snow bunting looked like.
Yeah.
So my argument to that was it was obviously a native bird because it wouldn't be in the show. And as far as I was concerned, it was beautiful. Its feather conditioning, the way it was staged, everything was perfect about it. So yeah, that was me defending my crown.
Wow. I mean, I've only ever seen one snow bunting, which was at the All British shown by Bob Fairchild, which was actually last February. I've only ever seen one. So yeah, they're definitely something different. It'd take you by surprise. It was one of those things I had to check on as well. Like, is that what I think it is, rather than some hybrid bunting or something like that? So
beautiful.
yeah, but I tell you what though, I think that's some great advice, picking the bird you like rather than what someone else likes, because especially as a judge, it's important. So that's excellent. Thank you very much for that. Where are we? So could you tell us how the INBBS started? I was told that you probably got a lot of information on this and quite a
I have
story
a
to
lot of
tell.
information on it and some in my mind and a lot I still have the minutes of the first council meeting. I have all the record books of the IMBDS. But I mentioned earlier the George Murphy, when I mentioned about Wexford, right?
Yeah.
George Murphy was a true and true native fancier. His favourite bird was a linnet. Anyway, his complaint for years, I've been told, he was much older than me, was that the way the native birds were treated at open shows, CBS shows, that they were always stuck down in the corner because they were only they were the poor man's fancy. Right?
Oh, right.
And him and maybe another half a dozen lads, two of them are I think still alive. Um, O'Connor was one. Jack Short was another. Jack is still alive. Um, anyway, about 6 men got together and they decided to set up the IMBDS, and that was in 1968. And as I said, I have all the records. I could have maybe had the notes with me and told you exactly where they were, but it would have been on forever.
Yeah.
So they started the first show. The first show was actually in Creighton Street. The club was formed in 68, and the first show was in Creighton Street that I mentioned earlier. And their main success was when they held the show in the Mansion House in Dublin. And the year, that was probably 1975, 76. and there would be nearly 900 birds in it.
Wow.
Now, that was all just natives, mules and hybrids. And it was a totally amazing show. There was lads from everywhere, absolutely everywhere of it. So, a great show.
Wow,
And
that's
it's going
fantastic.
strong since, yeah, the society is still
Yeah,
going
so
strong.
900 natives in that as well.
Yeah,
That's quite a show. I've not been lucky enough to see that many yet.
and
Hopefully,
you probably never will,
no.
because no, because I judge shows in the UK, like the London Home County, myself, my brother, and two other judges. And then there was other lads doing the soft bill, so there probably was fun. And there was nearly 1,000 plus boards at that show. And that was a 1 day show.
Yeah.
So you can imagine trying to judge all those boards. It was like a conveyor belt, boards coming up, yeah, 1, 2, 3, 4, yeah. But, the good old days of
Yeah.
40 years ago are gone, unfortunately.
Yeah, but that would take a long time to judge through that many birds. I mean, I've stewarded a few shows, and we're sorting through about 100, 200 natives, mules and hybrids there. So 900 must take a very long time to judge through, and I imagine that was large classes as well.
Yeah, well, the larger the class, the easier it is, because you've
Yeah.
only got 1, 2, and 3. So,
Well,
four,
yes,
yeah,
definitely.
yeah.
Well, that's excellent. Any tips for viewers showing birds, native birds in particular?
Well, yes. Firstly, a board has to be steady, and in order to steady them, you've got to work on them. You've got to be, even, like I went out the other day and I got a few green finches, caught up a few green finches, and hadn't been in show cages, and they were like something that you were at, catching in the
Yeah.
wild. But not that I've seen any wild birds for a long, long time. But anyway, what I would do is I would put them in show cages for a day and maybe 2 days, and let them back into the aviary for 3, 4 days, let them have their baths and so on and so forth, and work on them that way, bring them in and out and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
And obviously, then when you like our first show here in Ireland is swords. So all the young birds, and that's in October. So all the young birds go into the shows in October. And then you have another 1 or 2 in October and then November. But by the time it comes around to the all native in January, the birds have been in maybe 6 or 7 shows and they are steady as,
Yeah.
with the exception, you'll always get one that is not going to steady down, or it might just do something silly in front of the judge when it shouldn't.
Yeah.
But one thing that I find, or I feel you have to do, if you want birds to be in show condition, they have to have access to plenty of bathing water. Not once a week, home in a cage, because they go into a bath and have a bath. But if you have them in an aviary with a big bath in it, you will be surprised how much they will drown themselves. Really, it's a totally different thing. It's like yourself. If you don't have a shower for a week or 2, you feel totally different. When you do have it, And
So
it's fun,
yeah,
but it's
that's
better
excellent.
and better. Yeah.
So obviously, so steadying the birds, making sure they're steady in the show cage. So training
Yeah.
prior to the first show, especially, and then
Yeah.
also just regular baths.
Regular baths and obviously cages have to be spot on as well.
Yeah, that's brilliant. Thank you. All right. So, do you have any? Do you have a breeding season that was particularly memorable? Maybe you achieved a particular goal of yours or something.
Yeah, well, one member. Well, I read sometimes I've read up to 70, 80 boards. Last year I had 40. Let me see. I read 47, but some of them are nice boards. But one year that stuck out was probably about 30 years ago, when I was after being got a present from a lad for a lovely goldfinch cock, and from that goldfinch cock, I bred 8 more cocks, and they were all exceptional boards. Now, they won. I gave away a few, and the the ones I kept now, I always kept the better ones. You know, which obviously you know
Yeah.
they're not as. But the ones that I gave away used to push me at the shows. You know. Now one of those goldfinches uh, went over to. Can I mention names?
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, went over to Wales to a lad called Ewing Evans. I think it's Evans. Now Ewing got the bird anyway, and uh, he read a few off it. But I was asked to go over to Judge Wales, the Welsh National.
Yeah.
And here, lo and behold, I see this goldfinch in front of me, and I knew immediately that it was one of mine. So anyway, but the judging was over, and it was best British bird in the show. And I met up with Ewing, and I said to him, "Where'd you get that bird?" And he grinned, and he says, "It's actually one of yours, on." So anyway, I couldn't take it back. But he went on to breed from that goldfinches, and one in particular won the British National, it won the
Oh.
Scottish National, and it went on as well to win the Welsh National.
Wow, that must have been quite some bird then, especially for that.
The first, and would you believe it? The goldfinch cock that bred them all off never went into a moult on its first moult and died off. It just never went into a moult. For what reason, I do not know. I've never seen that happen before with a bird. That they normally die halfway through a moult, but it never lost a feather.
Wow, that's quite that's quite different then. Obviously, not going into the molt and then lose it, but sadly, it's just one of the things that happens with bird keeping, isn't it? It is always some of the best ones.
Yeah, and the thing about it is, I did, as I said, I kept 4 of the ones I bred, and but then, like everything else, you think you're just going to do it again. You don't protect them enough, and then, or you might give another few, and then when you're looking for one back, you can never get them again. You know? But I've had some nice goldfinches since then as well, you know. So.
Yeah, that's excellent. How many pairs do you put down each season then, and what are those pairs?
Well, this coming season, I will put down maybe 8 pairs of greenfinches, 8 pairs of 8 pairs of redpolls, maybe 3 pairs of siskins. I have a pair of chappies to put down, and maybe 2 pairs of bullfinches. Now I'll have a few other spare birds, but you know, but that's basically what I put down this year. Yeah. Yeah.
Fantastic. That's a good mix. How would you recommend actually breeding greenfinches? I've seen quite an array of different ways to actually breed them. Some people breed them in cages, some people breed them in flights, different mixed results. How would you breed them?
The greenfinch.
Yes.
Yeah, well, I breed the greenfinches in flights all the time. I think they're too big to breed in cages, and they put on too much weight, and I don't like a heavy bird. I like a fit bird.
Yes.
And I think fitness is fitness like ourselves. You know, if I'm 15 stone, you're the same height, you're standing beside me, and you're 11 stone, you're the perfect weight. I'm overweight. You know?
Yeah.
So
no, yeah, definitely.
Yeah, definitely. So I breed them I breed them in flights. Now the only time I put a greenfinch into a cage to breed is, as I did last year, if I was putting with a hen bullfinch to try and get a hybrid.
Yes.
Fortunately, I got one, or unfortunately, I got one bird a day, and the chick hatched but vanished. So,
that's a shame.
Yeah, and that was it again. What I done was I put the egg into it under a greenfinch in a flight.
Yeah.
And when it hatched out, that was it.
Wow. Yeah, well, it's what it's like breeding mules and hybrids as well. It's difficult, so that would make sense. What rearing food do you use, and what would you recommend for rearing?
For rearing, well, would you believe it? I use as much dandelions firstly when they come in, when they flower.
Yes.
I wouldn't give them flowers now. When they go into the Ginny Joe effect, just before you know what I mean about Ginny Joe.
Yeah. Yeah. So
just before they go to fly away.
Yeah.
I would collect bags and bags of dandelions, and if you get goldfinches and greenfinches, going to nest at that stage, they'll rear on those dandelions. Unfortunately, dandelions only last for about 5 weeks, 4 weeks, and then you're left without them there. If I can get chickweed, I will get chickweed, but it's not easy to get. But what I do, generally speaking, is I make up an egg food which consists of scrambled eggs, blue maw, and I'm using CD egg food. Now, the reason I'm using CD egg food for the last 2 years is not that it's become popular, it's just that they're giving it out at board shows as prizes. And last year I won something like 20 boxes, and the year before I won 20 boxes. So
Oh,
what
wow.
do you do? Well, you can't eat it yourself. So I use that. But from a soak seed point of view, the way I soak my seed is I mix up my own. I use, we say, a pint of hemp, a pint of niger, maybe a fifth of a pint of flax, and a fifth of a pint of rape. Mix it all up. But I would do that in a bigger bucket. I'd make a big bucket. So it might be 5 pints and 5 pints and
Yes.
so on and so forth. And I would mix that all up. And then I use that as my own. And nothing of it goes to waste. It's not like you buy seed for soaking and they won't eat the canary seed in it, they won't eat this and they won't eat that. But they do eat all the flax, the niger, the hemp, and the rape. And how I do it is I soak it in turned up Coke bottles, the big 2 litre or whatever bottles there, and I soak it for 24 hours, rinse it out, let it, just loosen the cap on the bottle and let the waters flow out. What you have to do is cut the bottles in half first, all of it. So the top half goes into the bottom half,
Yeah.
the seed in it, the water then flows through. But when that sprouts, I would then rinse that out and give them to all the birds, yeah. And also sunflower seed, I find, is sunflower heart's milk is a very popular seed for my birds anyway, to feed to the young, So
Yeah. Well,
I don't do anything extravagant. I don't use mealworms, although I might if I can get some.
yeah.
But it's just a basic diet I give them, and it seems to work for me.
Yeah, that's really good. Obviously, the waste which you're talking about, getting no waste from your soak seed mix, it is excellent. One of the things I found a lot is some seeds they prefer not to take too much of. So that's excellent. If you found a good mix which works for you and there's not much waste, that's excellent. Just in general, I asked you about green finches earlier, but do you breed in cages or flights, or a bit mix of both, depending on the species?
Well, I have 12 flights, so I would produce 95% of my birds in the flights. I have on occasions bred red poles and linnets in, we say, a treble breeder.
Yeah.
And I first got the tip from Sean Cross in Tipperary. Sean breeds in cages. Now, when I started doing it first, I was putting in sort of bits of branches and making up a sort of to hide the nest and all that, bits of Leylander trees. And when I went down to see Sean, and Sean just puts a nest bowl on the back of the cage, nest of material, and they will go to nest. And that's what I done, and I could not believe it. No cover, no nothing. And as he said to me, put them right at the door that you're going to be going your hand in and out of all the time, because they will get used to that and they become so tame and steady from all your activity around it. So and I've bred some fantastic linnets and red poles in cages. But I do prefer to do it in the areas because there's less cleaning to do.
Yes. Well,
the older you get, the less work you need.
Yeah, well, it definitely easier do it in flights in terms of keeping the mess down anyway, not having to clean out cages as often. But it is what it is, and if that works for you, that is excellent. What we're looking at then. So, any tips for viewers with the breeding season coming up? Anything in particular to do or not do?
Well, I'll tell you what not to do. Don't put them down too early first. We all want, when we see the goldfinch swaying or a greenfinch screaming, or a bullfinch piping and go, we can order in condition, and we start throwing in stuff and nesting material and all that. And
Yeah.
and then we all know that, you know, if the hen goes down, the cock really wasn't in condition. He doesn't trade, or he doesn't do the business, and you end up with blind eggs. So I would suggest that first week, maybe second week in April, is soon enough. If you can hold them back, I know some people will say that, oh, she was laying off the perch and she was laying off. But you know, if you can hold her back to as long as possible, you'll have a better breeding season. But with the climate the way it is now, like this year gone, we had our summer in March. Do you
Yes.
remember
Yeah, absolutely. I had
that?
bullfinches starting to build at the end of March.
Yeah,
It was crazy.
yeah. We had it was and green things, everything. And
Yeah, yes,
thought, oh, this is
definitely.
great. We're going to have a 6, 7 month season. But the next thing, there were blind eggs everywhere and so on and so forth. But if a guy has an aviary, um, and he has we say a mixed aviary with 3 or 4, 5 pairs in it, depending on the
Yeah,
size. All he can do is just leave them alone, put in uh, plenty of cover, as I would call it, and with the baskets, the nesting basket, that's what I do. I just stick them around into the various bits of leyland or trees that I put in, you know,
yeah,
and maybe a bit of heather or whatever. And the heather also is super for if there's bullfinches there, they pick the twigs off and they build a nest with that. And of course, if you don't put in nesting material out of it, they have nothing to build with. So, so
yeah,
there's not an awful lot more you can say.
No, that's excellent. I think you're definitely right with saying the about the like getting an early summer and keeping them off.
Yeah,
Yeah, I'm guilty of trying to put them down too early, and it
yeah.
ends up backfiring, and you end up with clear eggs all season from a cockbird because he's worn out or something like that, and
Now,
it's a
years
nightmare.
ago, I had a friend who uh, he didn't really keep any birds, but he had a goldfinch and a canary. And he
Right.
gave me a call on Paddy's Day, the 17th of March. Would I go over to him and ring 3 mules? I went over to his house, and on the 17th of March, I put rings on 3 mules for him. So
Wow.
you can imagine if it took 2 weeks for them to hatch, right? So they were about 7 days old. So it must have been middle of February when the or late February anyway, when the goldfinch cock was in condition and was well able to tread a hen. So
Wow, that,
yeah,
that's very early for a goldfinch,
very
especially.
early for a goldfinch. Now it was in the house. There was heat in the house. He had the cage up above a door, and there was a window above the door again. There was an old type house. You don't hardly see that anymore. And I'd say the bit of heat that was coming through the sun, the seed used to germinate in the cage.
Wow.
Yeah, and that's the way the type of person he was. But he got
Yeah.
those dolphins good.
Yeah, well, that's
So
it. If it's, I guess, in the house, it's a completely different environment to in the bird room. You know, it's
yeah,
much
yeah,
warmer and then obviously extended light hours. So it would
yeah,
make sense for it coming into condition quite early, rather than the normal May or late April for goldfinches, especially in the wild.
yeah.
Um, have you ever considered changing the birds you keep? You know, for example, going into canaries or Australian finches rather than the natives.
No, as I said earlier, I keep a few canaries, and at the moment I've only got two twice. I don't know whether they're cocks or hens, to be honest. I had a terrible season last year uh, with canaries for some reason. Um, but as for foreign birds, I love all birds. I love watching wild birds, and I like to watch them. When I say wild programs of all these foreign birds and
Yeah.
foreign countries. Um, and I like to watch the foreign birds in the shows. I look at them in the shows, but I don't think I did on one occasion get zebra finches when I was young enough. Um, and those zebra finches drove me mad. They were cacking all night, early morning, and the aviary that they were in was just outside the bedroom. And it's one of these days, I said to myself, "They're going," and they went. And that was like, oh yeah, yeah. Never
Yeah,
seems to be.
especially a lot of these exotic finches, like the zebra finches, very different breeding season to canaries and native finches,
Yeah,
which is one of the reasons that I've moved on from those. Is I think that the completely different breeding seasons really don't work. If we've got some birds in the middle of winter going to the shows, while some zebra finches, for example, are on
yeah,
eggs, it just
yeah,
doesn't work. It's better keeping to
yeah.
sort of one breeding season with a
Yeah.
certain area of these.
I, I was talking earlier to Kevin Horgan, Kevin
Yes.
from and he was telling me about the Java sparrows that his dad breeds. And he said I think he's about 50 or 60 youngsters at the moment. So
Ooh, wow.
they breed sort of, this is their breeding season as well. Yeah.
Yeah.
But that wouldn't interest me. Too wet and too cold and you don't
Yeah.
know.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
Yeah, with this time of year, I wouldn't want to be getting birds on eggs. I've been doing that before, and it just never ends up nice. Is there any other species you'd like to keep which you haven't already or don't have at the moment?
if I was young again and had plenty of energy, I would, as I did years ago, uh, a friend of mine used to keep peregrines and sparrowhawks and kestrels
Oh yeah.
and barn and they bred them in Norwich. Well, they bred the barn owls. It wasn't so easy to breed the other bulls. And I used to train them with them, and that was my son used to be with me as well, and that's a passion he still has when his kids are rare. But it's always too late when the kids are rare because they're too old. But that's what he wants to do. But that's if I did have an opportunity again, I would probably go into something like that. Yeah.
Wow. So birds of prey and
But yeah,
things.
yeah,
Wow.
yeah.
Yeah,
It's
it's like
fascinating. Yeah,
yeah, completely different ball game. I've been there with Harris Hawks and yeah, other hawks and owls, and it's obviously very different to keeping finches,
yeah, yeah.
keeping them
So
so fit and everything all the time, and a lot of food as well.
yeah.
The everything. So that's really interesting.
Yeah.
Do you have a bird idol, as it would be called, someone you looked up to, maybe in younger days or something like that?
Um, if I was to go through all the guys I've met over the years, let me think. Um, one of the most interesting board men who would have given not only me but lots of other people lots of ideas and and especially on exhibiting boards would be Jimmy Rutter. Now
Right.
Jimmy passed away a few years ago. You probably heard of Jimmy, didn't you?
Yes, I've heard of
Yeah,
him.
yeah. Jimmy to me would have been. Now he judged. He came over to Ireland a couple of times to judge. I actually, now that I think about it, he probably around about maybe 1998 or something like that. He put a green fringe hen of mine up as best British board in the IMBDS show as well.
Yeah.
And he said to me, when he came down, he said to me, who owns Greenfields number so and so, so and so, so and so. Anyway, I knew it was mine. And he said he'd never seen a bird like it. It was a hen bird. And it had an absolute fantastic head, fabulous colour. It was just a perfect show bird. And I thought, ooh, I have it now. This is me. I have it cranked. But that bird never laid an egg, never carried a twig in the 4 or 5 years I had it. She was barren. But getting back to the question, yeah, Jimmy Rutter would have been my idol, let's say. Yeah.
Wow. Well, that's fantastic. But do you have a greatest disaster and a big event that happened or something like that? Something off the top of your head you could think of?
I've had a few disasters, but let me think. Uh, one that gutted me now in particular was I had a yellowhammer cock that I acquired. I bought it from a lad for €30. And when I seen it, I thought, oh yeah, that is the yellowhammer for me. Now, it won every show, as I say, every show. Best yellowhammer. There was no yellowhammer that were undefeated. And Jim O'Dowd, the local judge here, put it up as best British stroke native board again in our local show. It was 4 years ago. Now, the same year, I showed it in the All Native show, the Irish Native Bird Breeding Society show, and it was best yellowhammer, and it might have got something else. I'm not really sure, but it was a dirty old weekend, and you know, cold, the snow, and all that type of rubbish. And I got a terrible dose out of it, a terrible dose of the flu or whatever. And
All right.
when I brought my 26 or 7 or 8 birds home that Sunday evening, I put them all out into their cages. I went straight into bed and, you know, covered myself up and wouldn't get out of bed. The next day I get out, I went around and I gave them all a drop of water and seed and went back into bed. That was on the Monday, the same again on the Tuesday, the same again on the Wednesday. And on the Thursday, I was feeling a little bit better. So I thought, I'd have a look at the birds and everything. And so I went out and I'm looking. And in the aviary that I had my yellowhammer, I couldn't see him. So I thought I must have put him into another aviary. Couldn't see him. I went around the place, couldn't see him anywhere. So I thought, where is he? So anyway, I went back into my garage where I kept all my board boxes.
Yeah.
Went through cage after cage, and eventually I opened one box that had 4 cages in it. And lo and behold, the first board I took out, or the first cage I took out, had my yellowhammer in it, dead. Right?
Oh, wow.
The other 3 cages, would you believe, Ollie, there was a green finch hen, there was 3 green finches in the other 3 cages, right? One in each of them.
Yeah.
And they were still alive. Now, they'd been in the show cages from Sunday at 3 o'clock to Thursday morning at, say, 10 o'clock. And they were still alive. Now,
Wow.
it would have been better for me if I had been the other way around, if the 3 green creatures were dead and the yellowhammer was still alive, but that wasn't to be. And I was absolutely gutted over that, you know.
Yeah, so wow, so it was just a case of
Yeah.
leaving him in the show cage then, and it just accidental.
Yeah, it was because I was so unwell at the time.
Yeah.
That's the only thing I could put it down to. Yeah. Couldn't wait to get into the house quick enough. So yeah,
Wow,
that was a disaster. Yeah.
Oh, that's really unlucky, but obviously if you really made these mistakes.
Yeah, I've had a rat in one of the flights, or in the only flight I had at the time when I moved to this place, and he ate all the birds, bar about 6 or 7. And then I caught him, and that was on a Christmas day, 20 years ago or something like that. But but I put the yellowhammer down to my worst disaster. Yeah.
Wow. Any tips for anyone starting out in the hobby? Obviously, this side of the hobby with natives. Any tips for those people?
If they're going to start out in natives, I would suggest that they start out with green finches, maybe.
Yeah.
Maybe a couple of pairs of green finches, or 1 pair of green finches, and maybe a pair of red poles, and maybe a pair of siskins, because they're easy birds to breed. You get lads that start out in the hobby, and they build big flights, they build this, they build that, and they buy everything, and they want to buy all the winners, and then 2 or 3 years later, they're disillusioned.
Yeah.
And they're gone. So rather than trying big and coming down, they would be better off trying at the lower end of the ladder and working their way up, and then enjoying the hobby. You know what I mean? And
yeah.
Yeah.
So working the way up, obviously starting with the easy and building up not only the difficulty in breeding the birds, but also the setup as you develop and enjoy it more, making sure it's your sort of thing.
It's your sort of thing, exactly, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I was guilty of when I started out. At least went to Stafford. Really big show. Got carried away. Walked away with a pair of native bullies, pair of green finches, pair of yellowhammers. Didn't breed anything that first year. 7 clear rounds of eggs from green finches, and I was lucky enough to be gifted some red poles and siskins, which I got a few from. But I think I jumped in feet first there with yellowhammers and bullfinches especially.
Yes. Yeah. Well, native bullfinches, as you probably are aware, are the hardest bird.
Definitely. Yeah, I cannot agree more. That very difficult birds to keep. And Yeah, they don't like being in a cage as well. These were these were Avery bred. These I got, and they were crazy. So, yeah, that's some great advice. Thank you very much for that. And just before we have to end this, anything else you'd like to mention to anyone, any of the viewers, anything else you want to say?
Um, yeah, I suppose most of those looking or who will look at this um, will probably keep boards, will probably show boards,
Yeah.
and what I would just like to say to them all is, if you look at the likes of that, can you see that?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. It's the exhibition standard for British boards. It also gives you all sorts of tips. And there's another one there, um,
Yes.
rules of
Rules
the
of the
IMBDS.
IMBDS.
Where it also gives
Excellent.
you all sorts of tips and the standards of the boards as well. And a lot of guys, and even some judges would never have seen one of them, and they wouldn't know what the standard really is. But rules of exhibition, I find, are problematic in the sense that people don't like rules. You know,
Yeah.
and why is my cage different because it's blue? What do you mean it should be green? And and all that type of stuff. And
Yeah.
if exhibitors could accept the rules and stick to the rules, on breeding boards as well. And when I say breeding boards, I mean there's no point in having a native bullfinch and a northern bullfinch and saying I should cross these and I put them in as a native or I put them in as a northern because they're neither one or the other. And but that happens a lot, and the rules in both of those magazines or books there say there are things you shouldn't do, but
Yeah.
unfortunately a lot of guys now. Unfortunately, some lads, in all their innocence, buy birds
Yeah.
and they think they're bullfinches, or they think they're native bullfinches, or they think they're native goldfinches, but they just don't know.
Yeah, no, it's that. I think that's a great thing to mention. Obviously, yeah, don't breed half chats, please, please, to everyone, don't breed half
You
chats.
mentioned you mentioned the swear word. I thought there was no swear words allowed.
Yeah, it's yeah, that's a great tip, and obviously, especially like you say, with some innocent people, yeah, buying a northern bird thinking it's a native, or vice versa, or
Yeah,
accidentally breeding half chats. You can't. I think that's one of the things, but knowing you're doing it, it's not ideal. Please don't breed half chats.
yeah,
I
yeah.
think
Well,
that's a great thing to take away from this as well.
yeah. Well, there are some scrupulous, is that the word? People who do it purposely for cash, nothing
Yeah,
else. You never see them in the show hall. You never see them putting birds in shows. They just do it for the cash,
yeah,
and they con the poor unfortunate step by them.
yeah. Well, yeah. No, you're dead right. I think, yeah, like you say, breeding birds for profit. Well, most of us don't do that. We
No,
breed,
no,
we breed them
no.
for fun, and if you manage to make some money on it, then you're very lucky because
You
usually
manage
it's
to,
the other
if you
way.
manage to, yeah, cover some of your seed even. You're doing well.
Yeah,
Yeah,
no, I 100% agree. Yeah, I usually end up down every year like that.
yeah,
Large seed bills, and also just getting carried away. Oh, that's a nice bird. I'm having that, and then you're down a fair bit. But I think we're all guilty of that in this hobby. So yeah, well, if that's it, really, if there's anything else you want to mention, or
yeah. Really, I think yeah.
yeah, that's
What was it?
excellent.
Covers a lot. Covers a lot. Anyway, now that it's over,
So that was the first episode of the Natives in Norwich Zoom Room. So I really hope you've enjoyed it. And obviously, there's a lot to learn from Owen. Owen has got years of experience and a lot of knowledge. A lot to be passed on as well, and a lot to learn from the guy. So a real big thank you to Owen for volunteering to be on the first episode. And obviously, it was an absolute honour to chat with you, and it was really good fun. And I learned so much from it. So a real big thank you to Owen, and I hope you guys learned a lot from that as well. So also, I would like to say a big thank you to Avian World Dublin for sponsoring the Natives and Norwich group. Obviously, yeah, it's been something I believe in several years now, and we've got some really big plans this year. Things to do with the group, Natives and Norwich and Avian World Dublin. So make sure you keep posted on that. And the link to Avian World Dublin's Facebook and the website is in the description below, as well as the Natives and Norwich group. That's once again in the description below. And if you are on Facebook, then you can join the group that way. So that brings us to the end of the first episode of the Zoom Room. So thank you very much for watching. I really hope you've enjoyed it. Please make sure you do subscribe so you can watch future episodes of the Zoom Room. They'll all be in our playlist on my channel, as well as all of my future videos. I release 1 to 2 extra videos per week, usually a Saturday morning and one around a Monday or a Tuesday or even a Wednesday sometimes. So please make sure you are subscribed for that. Please leave a like, and that shows me that you've enjoyed this first episode and encourages to do more. Obviously, we have a lot of special guests coming on this year and a lot of things to learn from that. So we've got some really big names in the hobby, so please do make sure you are subscribed and you keep posted on that, as we will have a lot going on. That as well, hit the notification button. That'll notify you and update you every single time I upload a new video. So more episodes of the Zoom Room with a lot more different members. Next week we're looking at, or next episode we're looking at a Norwich partnership. So we'll have to see how that goes. And please make sure you share this video with someone else who would be interested in watching this, and hopefully who would enjoy the video as well. So thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you in the next episode.